This was after he came back.
Quattrone has staged a remarkable comeback as Silicon Valley's go-to banker. He became a star during the 90s dot-com boom, bringing nearly 200 companies public, including Amazon and Cisco. But his career was sidelined in 2003 for 4 years over an obstruction of justice charge. Eventually, an appeals court overturned his conviction, and the government dropped the case. He's earned sweet revenge since then, starting a boutique advisory firm, Catalyst Partners. He's been involved in nearly every major tech merger in the last year, including Dell's bidding war with HP over 3PAR, HP's acquisition of Palm, and Texas Instruments' recent purchase of National Semiconductor. Clearly, he's challenging top investment banks for the biggest deals in technology. Randy Smith wrote the book on Quattrone, the Prince of Silicon Valley. He's also a reporter at the Wall Street Journal. Randy, welcome to Bloomberg West. So first of all, what is it about Quattrone? How does he get into these deals over big banks like Goldman and Morgan Stanley?
Well, I think he knows the players. He's been out in the Valley since the early 80s, and he knows most of the major venture capital investors and most of the major tech executives. And so he has been able to repot himself from the dot-com bubble when he led the most tech IPOs to currently when companies are being sold and are not being taken public as much, but are doing mergers and getting ready for IPOs.
Now, he did fight these obstruction of justice charges for 4 years. How did that really affect his reputation within the industry?
Well, I think it gave him a somewhat tarnished reputation on Wall Street, but on Silicon Valley, there was a feeling that he was being, I think, a scapegoat for the excesses of the dot-com bubble. His firm was charged with any number of violations, including spinning and biased research. And there were so many regulatory probes after the dot-com bubble because the tech stocks and particularly internet stocks had gone down so far. People were looking for people to blame, which is not unlike the current environment after the last meltdown.
So this one has got, this is the dot-com bubble right here, and I'm not sure what exactly they're measuring. This is probably one of the indices or something. So stock prices jumped like S&P 500, and then the 2001 crash. And then even compare that to 2008, it didn't get up that high.
Now, he did not cooperate with you on this book, right? Tell me how his relationship with the media has evolved from before he fought these legal battles up till now.
I would say he became more press shy, not just with me. He was pretty open and friendly during the 90s when he moved from Morgan Stanley to Deutsche Bank and then to Credit Suisse. I wrote a profile of him in 1999, which he cooperated with, and I think he was fine. But then once all the dot-com stocks went down by 80% or more on average, he kind of buttoned up, and there was an investigation of Credit Suisse starting in the middle of 2000, which lasted into early 2002. A few of his brokers who worked with him, were actually fired by Credit Suisse for handing out IPOs or demanding excess commissions, oversized commissions from clients who were trading clients, and that sort of kicked off a number of different probes. And that first one, where his brokers were fired, was the one he was accused of obstructing 3 years later.
It's kind of a shame he doesn't speak to the media more often. I've seen him speak at conferences, and he's really a masterful public speaker. In terms of his dealing with other businesses, what's his attitude? He was quite a showman in his early years. Has that part changed over the years?
I don't think it has. The last time I saw him was at a TechCrunch conference on the internet or on TV, and he appeared with, I believe, a Philadelphia Flyers jersey on because it was around the time of the Stanley Cup playoffs. So I think he's not afraid to brandish a quirky personality. I think he is still basically press friendly, even though in the recent New York Times profile of him, he said, "Oh, gee, I'd rather you not write the story." I can't believe he wasn't very happy with it because it talked about his big comeback.
So in terms of the question, is it luck or talent in terms of his success? What do you think the answer is?
Oh, talent for sure. I mean, he is, as you say, a very charming guy. He was very aggressive about bringing attention to himself during the bubble, which was during the dot-com bubble, which was it kind of went against him when Eliot Spitzer and all of his followers try to go after the people on Wall Street. But I think what happened to him is an interesting case of after the current bubble. You've heard people, including the guy who did the Oscar-winning documentary Inside Job, when he did his Oscar acceptance speech, he said, well, hey, they have not prosecuted anybody on Wall Street for all this stuff in the recent meltdown. Well, Trump is an example of what happens when they do go after a big fish after a bubble bursts, and they tried to get him, and they couldn't get him. He was charged with any number of violations by securities regulators, and all the charges were dropped. He was convicted of obstruction in 2004, but he managed to get that overturned on appeal, and he was even barred temporarily from the securities business, but that was overturned as well. So he outlasted them all. He had a huge legal team, and he won. So I don't know if that's why people think it's harder to go after Wall Street guys after the last meltdown, but it's certainly got to be in the back of their mind.
Right now, his boutique firm Palace has only about 30 employees. I mean, how do you see his business evolving in the next phase?
Well, there is a big difference between his profile now and back in the dot-com bubble. And one of the differences is he's not working at a major firm, which he did during the 90s. He's working at a boutique under his own umbrella, and he does not have a sales force because he's not taking companies public. So he doesn't need a few dozen salesmen to call the institutional buyers and sell the stock. He can do this with on his own nickel, just advising CEOs on how to get the bidding up for their own companies. So it doesn't take as many people, and he's got his leading merger banker from the last bubble, George Boutros, who just joined him recently.
All right, Randy Smith, author of The Prince of Silicon Valley.
When you can bill out at $1,000 to $2,000 an hour, you don't need to be running the company. Kind of a nice thing. All right, so that's a little bit on the spinning and the dirty work there. The last thing we're going to talk about, so the chapter talks about Dodd-Frank and Sarbanes-Oxley, and we did a Dodd-Frank video, and you've seen a little bit of that before. So I wanted to do the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to kind of tie into this because it followed the dot-com bust. The legislation did. So let me find that real quick here. And then we get into exchange rates. All right, Sarbanes-Oxley. There we go. Still don't think we read this one. Some of these are just student projects. So. Not too bad. So we've got 120,000 views for a student project.
In late 2001, people began to notice some mechanical irregularities with a large publicly traded company. The company had a national reputation for consistency in both good times and bad, so it was considered a blue chip stock. The name of this company was Enron. Within weeks, the stock went from over $90 a share to being nearly worthless. This occurred because the management team tried to cover up losses from previous years by altering their financial statements. The deception that occurred gave the public a reality check, and in effect, investors started taking a look into the financial records of other large corporations.
Can't need a banjo to learn about moral hazard and regulation.
The Sarbanes-Oxley Act was introduced in Congress by U.S. Senator Paul Sarbanes of Maryland and U.S. Representative Michael Oxley of Ohio. Their intention was to create a law which would restore the faith of investors back in corporate America. By imposing stricter standards on financial reporting, there would be an increase in the reliability of the financial statements created by any given company. Let's take a deeper look at what the Sarbanes-Oxley Act includes. First, officers of the company are required to sign financial statements for accuracy. This holds them personally accountable for any misrepresented data. Second, an increased fine and or prison sentence will separate individuals who attempt to defraud investors or misrepresent actual figures. Third, the company must provide a description of its internal controls. This is an attempt to increase the confidence of the public in that organization. while allowing them to gain an insight into the company's procedures. Fourth, the company is responsible for hiring an independent accounting firm to come in and audit the accuracy of their financial reports. The financial reports are now required to have a section dedicated to the auditor's opinion as to the accuracy of the figures presented in the reports. Fifth, the company is now mandated to report all off-balance sheet transactions on their reports. Finally, the Securities and Exchange Commission is given more power to look into companies that are suspected of wrongdoing. The SEC will now do random reviews of companies to ensure that they are compliant with the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. The reports are then published and released to the public review. The SEC is a special division that is designated to work with Sarbanes-Oxley issues. This division is called Public Company Accounting Oversight Division. Note this video about the educate you report with Sarbanes-Oxley.
Was there anything wrong with that? It sounded good. Tech, make things more transparent. In general, is making having a law that forces transparency of information bad? No, not generally. Economists are okay because we got an asymmetric information problem, right? And so part of that can be all right. Like with food labels, if you have a peanut allergy, you'd like to know that there's peanuts in something. Now, you could ask the producer and do that, but in terms of information, we'd like the seller and the buyer to be on equal information grounds. And so that was part of what was going here. But let's, this is a 3-minute video where somebody's trying to say it should be repealed. Let's see what they have to say.
Many Americans are worried about the economy and want to see steps taken to get the economy moving again.
This year, Congress has allocated $1.2 trillion to get the economy moving, and yet all this spending is only slow the rate of decline.
It is clear that Congress has to develop new strategies and approaches to grow the economy once again.
There is one step Congress should take immediately, which would liberate American businesses, create jobs, and provide opportunities for new startups, and not cost the taxpayer a penny.
Congress should repeal Sarbanes-Oxley, which costs every small business $4,360,000 a year in compliance if it wants to become a public company.
$4,360,000 a year is massively bigger than the original Securities and Exchange Commission estimate. It would cost $91,000 a year for compliance. The government estimate was wrong, a factor of 4,000%.
This difference in cost can be a matter of life and death for small businesses.
One California venture capital firm told me that Sarbanes-Oxley has pushed new businesses back from a 5-year startup period to a 12-year startup period.
This costs money and jobs, and it discourages future entrepreneurs from starting their own businesses.
America's great strength has always been inventing the next generation of new companies and new jobs. America is always focused on growing the future rather than propping up the past.
Now Sarbanes-Oxley is destroying new job creation and new company growth at a time when we need it the most.
The effect of Sarbanes-Oxley in Silicon Valley has been especially dramatic. In the second quarter of 2008, there were no public offerings of venture capital-backed companies in Silicon Valley, a phenomenon not seen since 1978. In the third quarter, there was only one.
Sarbanes-Oxley has had a direct effect on venture capital. If it is not repealed, we will see Silicon Valley's status as a hotbed of innovation erode, and see more and more of our future invented outside the United States.
Alex Holland, a distinguished scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, has concluded that the total cost far outweigh the benefits, especially for smaller companies.
Mr. Hull is not alone. Roberta Romano of Yale has concluded that Congress pieced together a series of reforms, resulting in provisions that were ill-conceived.
In fact, Ms. Romano is so unhappy with Sarbanes-Oxley that she recommends that corporate governance provisions should be stripped of their mandatory force and rendered optional for registrants.
The experts have condemned the cost of Sarbanes-Oxley.
Business leaders, entrepreneurs, and venture capital investors have all condemned the cost of Sarbanes-Oxley.
The time has come to create more American jobs and grow more American companies by repealing Sarbanes-Oxley.
you agree that Congress should act now to help the economy by repealing Sarbanes-Oxley, go to AmericanSolutions.com and sign our petition to Congress to help create jobs and repeal this bill.
Remember, the economy you are saving is yours.
All right. So you get one spin that looks pretty good on paper, right?
So wait, how are they saying it stop jobs?
Well, how are they saying it stops jobs?
Firms don't want to basically become businesses, so those jobs that would be there if the act wasn't in place for the jobs of those firms. Small businesses.
Yeah. So to the extent that this price tag keeps people away, or some businesses expanding that wouldn't have otherwise done it, or slows it down. So they said it went from what was it, 4 years to 12 years as far as the planning horizon. So the stuff we've been talking about with Allison and the textbook with initial public offerings and stuff, there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And basically the government piled on more stuff with some of these rules and controls and stuff to get there, to get to that spot. Does that answer your question for the most part, Isaac?
Yeah.
Okay.
I guess I'm just kind of like struggling, like what would be like the happy medium, because like all these big players like Enron and all them, like they were falsifying their statements. How do we keep that from happening? And then how do we also?
Exactly. I mean, so we have basically Enron. I mean, if we handpick the ones that they picked on and the few that I've showed you in class, we've got, 5 major, let's say, cases in a 10-year period, 5 single companies. How many companies didn't do that crap? A lot, right? But yet then the legislation, because Enron has the media's attention and Enron has the headlines, and look at this bad actor and this guy scammed people, then what does that naturally lead general public to think? Oh, well, how many others are out there, right? And so they think all bad business, evil corporation type thing, and capitalism is broken, and the only answer is for government to come in and penalize, just like the police come and penalize criminals. They would do that. Whereas the free market, what would be going on if we left things alone? Who lost with Enron? The investors, for sure. The one that's sad is the employees. So there's stories of people who had their whole retirement investment with stock in the company, and they lost everything. But if we, it happens. I mean, it's a lesson to be learned that don't keep all your eggs in one basket. I just in personal finance class today went over diversification, right? So having all of your retirement in a single company, even if it's your own company, isn't a good thing to do. And so those lessons would be, learned by those people that are directly related. They would do their research, they would do their homework. They, back to the same thing, that the market response would be to people would be more careful on where they invested, whether they invested in an Enron or not. So as far as happy mediums go, there's probably some low-hanging fruit of all of this stuff that would pass a cost-benefit analysis, right? So you could take each item individually and like, oh, well, officers signing on to that sounds kind of reasonable, right? Like all it takes is their signature, rather than what happened in the past is the officers of the organization would just say, oh, that's below me. That person down there made that decision, so I'm not responsible, right? So it kind of forces another set of eyes and personal accountability on the part of the top officers of the company. So that's what I think would happen, rather than having this bundled thing that we're going to, in order to keep an Enron from ever happening, we're going to put these type of rules on everybody. Doesn't even come close to passing a cost-benefit analysis, right? In terms of the additional things that we're doing. But probably some line items might.
So I'm only came up with that just to auditing last semester, and so like
You took what last?
auditing last semester.
Oh yeah.
So it made me think like, because our teacher, she had basically said that when the act
a conflict of interest type problem or whatever.
And it was also their reputation that they would have to sign off on it. So
Yeah.
I don't, would that be a good cost benefit? If you think about like auditors would be more, if an auditor is not willing to take that decision on the client, that might be bad.
Possibly, but they would just shop around auditors, so it probably wouldn't be known necessarily that an auditor would take it, and it might be pretty reasonable that, oh, I have a conflict of interest. Kind of like when an attorney recuses themselves because they have a personal interest in the case or whatever. So I wouldn't be too worried about that, but forcing the independent audit, you know, it can add a lot of costs. It's not cheap to hire the CPAs and tax experts and to come and do a full audit of your books, and maybe the frequency of those audits, and you know, some of that stuff is in place already. So maybe there'd be a happy medium of not as frequently, but you know, at some point. But independent audits are a way for businesses can voluntarily do independent audits. Again, so if in a free market, if you want to raise money for your company, you can say, I hired an independent audit. I paid for it out of my own books, but they are a third-party audit, and here's the books. Here's what the audit said, right? And that's kind of what goes on anyway. But it would just be not by force. You wouldn't have to do it if you didn't have to. And then investors would choose, well, this one had an independent audit, this one didn't. I like that these people were showing me that they're really safe and they had this from independent audit. So yeah, there might be lots of different ways to kind of do each one individually. I think a lot of times well, certainly the emotions and everything of this one size fits all, and then the politicians are able to kind of get support for that, even though after the fact, we see time and time again, government tends to take an inch and grab a mile, right? They win an inch, and then the laws are usually very broad. Like Sarbanes-Oxley says, okay, these are the 7 bullet points, and we're going to pass this into law. And then what happens is they go to other employees of the government, the bureaucrats, that say, okay, how the hell do we do this? What is this? You know, 1 bullet point doesn't show how we're actually going to do it. And so then you get a bunch of bureaucrats around the table, and they're like saying, oh, well, what if we do this? Oh, it'd be safer if we did this. And they're not doing a cost-benefit analysis the same way a business would, right? So they're just like, oh, well, this is what we have to do. Let's put this in place. Let's put this in place. And then it grows, what they say in the video, 400% or something compared to where they started, because they didn't have a good feel for that going into it. Okay, anything else? So you'll see that in the textbook as you go through. Some of the other ones, Dodd-Frank was similar. It usually something follows a big bust. So the dot-com bust brought on Sarbanes-Oxley, and then, and by the way, you saw that spike. That's like the GameStop deal, right? I mean, even the 2008 financial crisis didn't get up to that peak. Like, it was insane. All of these Silicon Valley, I've got an idea about an app, we're going from $10 to $1,000, and people were just pouring money in an irrational way, and eventually the dot-com bust popped, and that was it. So the boom turned into a bust. But having lived through that time, it was kind of insane where, oh, everything's great and everything's technology and the technological revolution's here, and like, but people really didn't even know how to use computers back in 2001, right? And so everything was like new compared to where we are at 19 years, 20 years later. Okay, so today, unless there's any other last comments there, we get started into exchange rates. Exchange rates. So, this is JC's favorite topic of Forex. I don't know, is it still your favorite topic, or have I steered you away from it finally over the years?
When I get a lot of money, I'll like that.
Okay. Yes, it's a great place to gamble if you're in for short term, but also pretty important for our global economy to work through. So chapter 20 kind of goes through various aspects of exchange rates, and so I'm going to start with some definitions. So the foreign exchange market. So this is not for your stuff this weekend, by the way. So this is kind of the next week's stuff we're kicking off. So the foreign exchange market, which is really the Forex market. Foreign exchange is where that comes from. So Forex. And so this is the financial market where exchange rates get determined. So what is the exchange rate? How would you define the exchange rate? Let me, JC, give me a number between, I don't know, what do you think, 5 and 10? 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Isaac, you're number 5. How would you define the exchange rate?
I would define the exchange rate as the rate at which I can exchange one foreign currency for another foreign currency and able to buy.
Yeah, you can pretty much stop there. Yeah, right. So it's the exchange rate is simply it's the price of one currency expressed in terms of the other currency is another way to think about it. But it's, so the rate at which you can exchange one currency for the other. So the price is really the price of one currency. The price of one currency in terms of another. How much is a dollar going to cost me in terms of yen? 110 yen. So what's the price of a dollar? 110 yen. So we're just thinking what it takes to go in front of one or the other. So then we have a couple distinctions with the one we're looking at. So we have the spot transaction. A spot transaction. So this is kind of the immediate rate, or it's within 2 days, which is, so the immediate 2 day for actual money being exchanged is, so exchange of deposits. So there's a little bit of a float time. So if you want to convert your currency today, well, we need to find somebody who's holding that currency, and it actually needs to be transferred from one bank account to another bank account. So you might go in and get it, done right on the spot, but there might be actually a little bit of a lag for the transaction. So that leads us to the spot rate. So the spot rate is the rate at which is stated for you to do it immediately. And then we also have forward markets. So a forward transaction, similar to our last chapter, chapter 14 rather. So a forward transaction is the exchange of bank deposits at a specified date in the future. So this is the forward rate. Okay, so what we saw before was if you want to exchange, if you want to hedge your bet on what the yen to dollar exchange rate's going to be 90 days from now when you have a deal coming, you can use the forward rates, which is basically a forward contract of you're agreeing to deliver $100,000 on 90 days from now, and in exchange, somebody else is going to deliver 3 million yen. And so that is just a deal that's done between two parties. So that's our forward rate. All right, questions or comments there? All right, some more definition stuff that you guys have seen in other classes, but we got to have it all officially down here. Appreciation. Appreciation. Let's see, where did we move on with Isaac? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Luke, you are lucky number 5. What does it mean for a currency to appreciate or have appreciation?
Well, appreciation would be the opposite of depreciation. Depreciation is just basically.
Okay, I'm going to go to somebody else for depreciation. So you're going to have to come up with something for appreciation.
Appreciation, I think of a good way to phrase it. Basically, your good earning, like it's basically gaining value.
Okay, now put it in terms of currency. So if you want
Your currency value has been improving or going up in the past 2
Give
years.
me yen and dollar. So currently it's 110 yen for every dollar, but now the dollar is appreciating. So how many yen am I getting now? You can make up a number.
So would it be like, if your dollar is gaining more value, then it would take more yen.
Appreciation of the
It
dollar.
would take more yen to get $1. So say 120 yen would give you now $1.
Okay. So, or to think of it in terms of the long position with the dollar, my dollar now buys 120 yen.
Yeah.
Yesterday it bought 110. So it's appreciated. I'm getting more yen for every dollar. Right? So appreciation, good, is a rise in the value of one currency to another. So the appreciating currency, let's say parentheses the dollar, the appreciating currency now buys more of foreign currency. Like the yen. So for example, if $1 got you 110 yen, and now one single American dollar gets you 120 yen. So the dollar has appreciated. For the Japanese, what happened to them? Depreciation. So one currency's appreciation, the other currency's depreciation. So depreciation is, as Luke put it, opposite of appreciation. And so 110, I used to buy $1 with 110 yen, and now the Japanese currency holder has to use 120 yen to buy $1. So when does it become more expensive for Americans to buy Toyotas from the Japanese? When the dollar appreciates or depreciates? When does it become more expensive? Depreciate? So depreciate. So let's see. So that's this scenario here. You're saying where?
So it's more expensive for the American to buy.
Yeah. When does it become more expensive for the American to buy a Japanese product? When it appreciates or depreciates?
Depreciate.
Your dollar, there's one appreciation, one depreciation, depends on which one.
Right here. So the appreciating currency. So is it when the dollar appreciates, is it more expensive or less expensive for us to buy the Japanese product? Is it less expensive? Less expensive. All right, because your dollar's worth more yen. So we want to think about that in terms of global trade. When one becomes higher or lower, does it work to our benefit with our basket of goods, or does it work the opposite direction? All right, so when a country's currency appreciates, the country's goods abroad become more expensive. This is for foreigners. So when a country's currency appreciates, the country's goods abroad become more expensive. So foreigners have to pay more. That was our Japanese here. And foreign goods in that country become less expensive. All right, so then that's going to affect our trade flows. When exchange rates change, we might change some of our imports and exporting behavior. So is dollar appreciation always the most preferred thing? So question, do Americans want an appreciating / strong dollar? Do all Americans, I mean, is that what kind of a national goal that we want a strong dollar? Everything out there? Me. Luke. 1, 2, Marco. 3, 4, 5, Lawson. So I want a strong dollar. American dollar needs to get stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger, and the stronger the better.
Not necessarily.
Okay, why? Not sure on that one?
That's just kind of my hunch.
You know, and so let me just kind of add in, I want to give you a little opportunity. There's a couple of people ready to jump in, which we can go to. Do all Americans want an appreciating dollar? So let me just phrase it a little differently. Can you think of an American who would say, I really like a weak dollar. I prefer a weak dollar is better. I'd like this going the opposite direction. A weak dollar would be preferred for me.
What if they have debt?
What's that?
What if they have debt?
Okay.
Yeah.
So depending on who owes whom, right, and what it's denominated in, that would be an example. Let me go back to Eddie.
Exporters.
Exporters. So why do you say that?
because countries are going to want to deal with you because they can buy more for their value.
Yeah, if you're an American exporter, and that's what you do to make a living, then that's not going to be very good for you, right? Because it's more expensive for the foreigner. So if you specialize in foreign goods, like let's say of your company, you sell 20% of your business goes to Americans, but 80% is exported. That's going to be bad news for your business model, right? So you don't want an increasing dollar. Luke, did you have anything to add on? That's what you're thinking? Anybody else comments on that? So that's what I bring this up because I don't want to have the perception right away that an appreciating strong dollar is good. It's not necessarily good for all people. It might be good for some people within the United States. So we don't necessarily need to think of it as good or bad from the American side of the equation, that it's good for America to have an appreciating dollar. We'll try to get rid of the good bad part. I mean, there might be things that it could be a sign of strength, or it's just an equalizing factor. It's just a price that's moving, the price of currency between two countries. And so that's what we're going to learn in this chapter is the underlying factors that are going to be impacting that. So do all American people want an appreciating dollar? No. So if 80% of your business, for example, is exporting, then you get hurt financially. And then Lawson, you came up with the loaning part, right? So what would that one be? It doesn't have to necessarily be Lawson here, but if you're borrowing or lending, so now you're an American. If you're a lender or a borrower, how's this one gonna hurt you? Lending, Jonathan? If you're buying dollars, okay. So if you're buying dollars, so if you are on, I'm trying to think here. If you're lending or borrowing, so if we have a bank, so you're borrowing dollars. So are you a foreigner borrowing dollars? So foreigner with dollar-denominated debt gets hurt or helped with an appreciating dollar. Hurt, right? So that means who gets helped? The lender, yes. So a foreigner with dollar-denominated debt gets hurt, but lender gets helped, or bonus, or something. I don't know. Help's not the best word. But just so we kind of start to think of, there's two ends of this equation. So it's kind of a zero-sum game analysis, right? Like we talked about last time. One person's win is going to be the other person's loss. It depends. Are you the lender or you're the borrower on either side? Yeah, Caleb?
So if you're lending, like say I'm lending to somebody and the dollar's appreciating, wouldn't it be harder for them to pay it back?
Yes. Yeah. So it's going to be harder for them to pay it back. And then really, you're just, okay, so, and let me be careful here. So if you're the American lender, you just want your dollars back, right? The Japanese person owes you $10, and so they're now having to do 120 times 10 instead of 110 times 10. But at the end of the day, you're just getting $1. So how does the lender would have to benefit? So I kind of want to be careful with this. What does that lender have to do to be benefited by this? To what? Yeah, you got it, to buy a Japanese good or something, right? They have to convert it back to yen, or they have to want a Toyota or whatever. But somehow they'd have to be wanting to use that for Japanese purchases or Japanese, so they'd have to work to their advantage some way. Because otherwise, they're just an American, and I only buy American. I only buy Jeeps and what's our TV, nothing is American anyway, by the way, you know that, right? Like all the parts and pieces of it, this is an American-made product. Well, likely 80% of the parts and pieces come from different countries. But not in all cases, obviously, if it's a local farmer here, I buy American, yeah, that was probably raised here, although the seeds might have came from a different place that was planted for it. But nonetheless, if I only buy American and I get my dollar back, then really that foreign exchange thing didn't matter too much. That's my fault. Okay, any other last questions there? All right, looks like a wrap. We'll pick up there on Monday.